The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific, yeah! It's Cartoonerific, 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 it's Cartoonerific, with your host Brian Mitchell.
Well, howdy, and welcome to the Cartoonerific Podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and as always, I am your host. On today's episode, we're going to do things a little bit differently. There's a lot of shows that we've done over the last couple of years, and some of them have just not gotten the love that they should have, or I believe they should have. And so this particular episode, we're going to revisit some of those shows with some clips, and we're going to go all the way back to show number 1 and do shows from then to now. And, maybe 5 or 10 minute clips of things that I thought were kind of fun. And so we're going to present them here. I'm calling it the FRANKENTOON show. So it's our Frankenstein mix of all these different shows from the last couple of years. And we're going to start it off with season 1, episode 40, and that was with Mr. Sandro Cleuzo. He is a fine animator from South America, and he got his start in South America doing animation, and then worked his way to a studio in Ireland called the Don Bluth Studio. And so instead of sending a portfolio, which is the norm, you send a portfolio to the studio, they review it, and then they get back to you maybe. He actually went with a friend and flew to Ireland, and it's a very interesting story, and we're going to revisit it right now. So here's Sandro telling his tale, how he got a job at the Don Bluth Studio.
That's cool. It's good to do that too.
Yeah. So you decided you want to get out of that and you wanted to work on something that, where you could really do some character animation, like spread out a little bit. So what happened?
Yeah. So what happened was, I saw this booklet that this producer from the studio, she just came back. I remember she came back from Europe, from Annecy, maybe, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But she brought this booklet about the Don Bluth Studios in Ireland. I don't remember the booklet. It's amazing. I have a copy with me. It's
I would love to see that, because I've seen the Disney booklets, but I've never seen the Don Bluth booklet. It's
not a thick book. It's just like a booklet that it's very thin. Just it shows all the departments of the studio, the history of Don Bluth, in the departments. Because it was a booklet that they gave to people, because when they were hiring people, they want people to be interested in the studio.
Sure.
And I remember going to her room at this Briquet studio here in São Paulo, and she had this booklet on the table, on her table there. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, that's the studio I want. Because I remember seeing this Secret of Name VHS, and I was blown away. I was like, wow. Who are these people? I never heard of these people, and this is the best movie I've ever seen in the animation. I want to work for them. Right. That's what I wanted. Right. I forgot Disney by that time, because when I saw that, I was like, I want to work for these people. Don Bluth, I don't know who they are, but because I didn't know the history of them. I just saw the movie, Right. And I saw these names: Don Bluth, John Pomeroy, Gary Goldman. Yeah. And I was blown. For me, it was like. I had to work for these people. Mm-hmm. And then when I saw the booklet on this producer's table, I was like, this is the people. This is the studio from the people who did that movie. I want to work for them. So I borrowed, and I got the address in the back. Mm-hmm. And my plan was, okay, I want to work for them. So my plan was to save my money for 1 year and prepare my portfolio. For 1 year, almost a year, I prepared my portfolio,
Right.
and I saved my money because it was very difficult to save money. So I was able to, after one year, to get my plane ticket and save like $1,000, something like that.
Yeah.
And I had a portfolio, So I just flew to Ireland, to Dublin, and I knocked on the door and asked for a job. And it was very interesting because they were like, no, what are you doing here? You should, like at the reception, right? I went to the reception, said, I tried to ask them, can I show my portfolio? Can I meet Don Bluth,
Right.
And they said, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to go back to Brazil and send your portfolio. And if you like, we'll call you. And I said, but listen, I'm here in front of you. I'm here.
Right.
And I just came over. No, it doesn't work that way. Nobody knew what to do. They were like calling people, and the receptionist called somebody, came down, and she had a dictionary because I didn't speak English very well at the time.
Right.
And this lady came with a Spanish dictionary, which doesn't work because I speak Portuguese.
Right.
It's not Spanish. So they tried, and I tried to explain what I wanted. And like I begged, listen, I have a portfolio. I want to show Don Bluth. And they, after like 1 hour, I said, no, just okay, come back tomorrow.
Right.
So I went back to the hotel. I couldn't sleep. Right. So I came back in the morning, next morning. Yeah. The same thing. No, just go back to Brazil, send the portfolio. And I begged more. And then Don Bluth came in. Right. And he said, hi. But I froze. I couldn't do anything. I didn't talk to him. I just froze. Oh, it's Don Bluth. He's the man I want to meet. And he just walked in, and that was it. And then I begged him more and more. And they I think they had so much of me. They said, okay, just wait. They took my portfolio inside. Right. And after like 10 minutes, they called me in to come in. Right. So actually, I was with my friend. I had a friend from Brazil who came over with me. Right. And so it was me and my friend begging them. Mm-hmm. So my friend Edson Gonçalves, he's like an animator too. Yes. And so it was me and him begging to show our work. So, but then after we begged so much, they couldn't take it. They said, okay, just wait. So they took our portfolios. They called us in like 10 minutes after. Right. And went upstairs. Don Bluth had our portfolios open on the table. And he asked, okay, who's this portfolio here? It was my portfolio. Right. I said, this is mine. He said, you're going to be an animator. You're hired. Just like on the spot. Wow. And my friend was like, okay, you're going to be Sandro's assistant. But I never used an assistant before. So I never used my friend Edson. Right. So he was hired. Right. And it was amazing because I was hired as an animator. I thought I was going to be hired as a cleanup artist. Right. You thought you were going to go from the bottom rung again. Work my way up. Right. Yeah. I was hired as an animator. And how old were you? When 19. 19 at that point. Right. Okay. Yeah, I worked for Briquet Films from when I was 15, from 15 to 19 when I decided to. Wow. And then it was amazing because I think Don was very impressed. Just the fact that we came all the way from South America with our own money to to ask for work. A good friend of mine, Cynthia Petrovic, came on the show, and she's a storyboard artist. She's worked on a lot of different things for Warner Brothers and Disney and many other studios. She's very, very creative, and she has some very fun stories. And she recounts some of those stories meeting Steven Spielberg at Warner Brothers. And I just thought this was real fun. It is episode 10 from season 2 of the podcast. And I think I have that right. Do I have that right? Yes, I do have that right. So it is episode 10 out of season 2. And here's Cynthia to talk about that now. When I came back. Okay. Yeah, you may not have been around for this, but here's one of my greatest stories ever, literally. Okay. And we can tell it here on the Cartoonerific podcast. Here it comes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, absolutely. Okay, so I was working at a camera store,
in May, got hired. In July, they had the wrap party, and they invited all of us, even if we didn't work on first season, invited everybody to the Warner Brothers lot into a soundstage, and they kind of decked it out to look like a high school gym, because the Tiny Toon characters were high school characters.
Right.
All right. So Dean McCurdy's up there, and probably Tim Sarnoff, all the big guys. Here we are. Thank you, everybody. Okay, we're all imagine we're all standing kind of in the back of the gym, so to speak,
right,
and looking at Gene up in the front,
right.
And Steven Spielberg comes, just casually walking up to kind of, he's got this kind of raggedy old sweater that he was kind of holding,
right.
And he comes and it's like right next to me, because he was the executive producer.
Yeah.
And he's standing right next to me. This is 3 months after I was working at a camera store at the Orange Mall. I'm standing next to Steven Spielberg.
Right.
Okay. But that's not the best part of the story.
Okay.
He had this, I mentioned he had this kind of scrappy looking sweater that he was holding.
Right.
He sets this, first of all, when he walked in, it's like, I thought, oh, look, wow, Spielberg himself. That's cool. The whole room changed from this kind of relaxed, we're having a good time, to this tension that you could feel because everybody knew Spielberg was right there. It's like a string has been pulled back as tight as everybody is struggling not to do anything, say anything. Yeah, it was so interesting.
Right.
To witness the dynamic of what happens around celebrities or whatever directors.
Right.
He takes the sweater, because he's sitting, he's going to listen. He's, completely like a normal guy, sets the sweater down, and he continues, he folds his arms, he's listening to, Dean's speech.
Right.
And it's over. Okay, so woo, and that everybody is just, struggling not to rough him.
Right.
And, I watch him, I turn and watch him, and he's like, what happened to my sweater, and about 30 people rushed to grip that sweater and pull it over to him, he took it. And it's like, this is my first real taste of just the, upper echelons of brown nosing like I have never seen. This was all new to me.
Right.
It's like, that's cool. Spielberg's cool enough.
Right.
And he was a very casual, cool guy. He was, because he came and visited maybe once more or whatever. And he walked around like there's nothing pretentious about Spielberg. It's like he was one of us. He was just, asking questions. And everybody else was just, like I said, that tension, the adrenaline that was being, the sweater story is just, that's like one of my favorites, just watching that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, that's pretty wild. He came in. I remember he came in. He came in at Warner Brothers, and he was very happy with Animaniacs. Yeah.
Yeah, we were all doing like little tests, animation tests, and I recorded one of the moments when he was talking to.
Oh, you did?
Phil Mosnes had the wherewithal to have a mini cassette player, and when Spielberg was walking around, Phil hit record, and it recorded another one of these epic, just brown nose episodes with people tripping all over themselves.
I think I know which one. I think I know which one this was, and it didn't have something to do with a specific Bob Clampett character.
No. Yeah.
I kind of remember it.
He wanted to know what other character was bouncy and stretchy like yes. And there are all these shouts of voices of people desperately trying to answer Steven Spielberg's questions. And then there's this little go-go, coming from Tom Ruger in the back.
And then everybody...
And it's like that was it. No, he got the right answer.
And then everybody's... Go.
Yeah, then it became the questioning, confused go-go expression became, for years, we would go around go-go,
Yeah.
Because he was like, he didn't know, was that the right answer?
Yeah.
I actually wrote a whole script. I scripted that whole thing out, and we did it as a script.
That's funny.
Huh?
That's funny. I just remember it. Well, I just remember go, like that. Kind of that type of thing. It's like, go.
Yeah, but it was like way in the back room after everybody had blasted out the wrong answers. And, Spielberg does this expect people to desperately scramble around for some inane little question like that. I mean, anyway, those are golden moments. And then remember when we did that whole movie? We made a movie. We had some downtime.
Oh, yes.
And all of us did a movie about Richie's head bouncing around the office. Rich Aaron's lost his head.
I remember
you did that.
I remember.
You were working.
Yeah, I think I was involved with that one. I think Joey Banaskowitz was involved with that. Do you recall?
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because he provided the Tyrannosaurus Rex head that ate Richie.
There's a lot of good stuff going on over there. I remember they ran that in the conference room.
Golden times.
Yes, they ran that in the conference room, and it got big, big laughs. I remember a character sneezing, and basically it was like a lot of phlegm going across the room and hitting the wall. And
that's right.
Yeah,
yes.
That was part of it, and it was all very funny. But you could see what was amazing about that was that the talent that was at that studio that could pull off something like this with I don't know if it was videotape at the time. Were we doing videotape or were they using?
Yeah, it was video.
It was video. Yeah, it was videotape. So, yeah, it was all in camera, edited in camera. And.
Right.
Yeah, but no, it said a lot about the talent that was there, that, they were all very funny people and all very talented at what they could do. And they could put this together and get uproarious laughter. I remember that room just being, and somebody played Steven Spielberg in the movie.
Yeah, there was a guy at the studio, and he put a hat on, baseball hat, and he kind of looked like Steven, and I think, we had Richie sneeze on him? Or
yes.
He was the one that got the...
That's right. And then, and then the Spielberg character ducks out of the way, and then it's just like, and I think it was shaving cream, but it looked pretty gross. It was green shaving cream. Another fine artist that we've had on the podcast was in season 1, episode 1. Actually, it's episode 2. And that was Matthew Bates. And Matthew, he was exploring animation in high school. He was thinking about it, and he wrote a letter to one of the premier animators at Disney at the time, which was Frank Thomas. And Frank Thomas responded, and he ended up going down to the studio to meet with Frank Thomas. It's a very interesting story, and if you haven't heard it, here it is. Well, let me ask you this: did you have any teachers that were discouraging you?
You know what? That's another good question. It's funny, in high school, after junior high and high school, I had a junior high art teacher. I just can't remember her name, but she was a good encourager. She saw the way I drew, and she motivated me. She always encouraged me. She always had something nice to say about what I was doing, but she always told me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. Right. Which is important for me because I was, like I told you before, I think I was very competitive as a kid. Competitive in sports, anything that I did when we were playing board games with my family, very competitive. Right. Very competitive. And so I took that level of competitiveness into my drawing. I had a good teacher. She always encouraged me. She always, gave me the reasons why, she didn't just say, oh, that's a nice drawing and move on. She told me what she liked about it, what wasn't working. And that was the first time I heard that. And I needed to hear that because I was always competitive as a child. And so, I want to know what I'm doing right. I want to know what I'm doing wrong, and if it's wrong, then I want to do it the right way. And then I took to my senior year of high school, my teacher, Harry Champus, great teacher, ex-Marine, and of all things, our teacher, he did the same thing. He really showed me things about drawing that I had never learned before. And it opened up another realm of drawing to me. And I remember writing a letter when I got out of high school, just as I graduating high school. I think I was just graduating high school. I wrote a letter to Frank Thomas, one of the Nine Old Men. Oh, wow. Yeah. And I don't know if I told you the story. And so I wrote him a letter saying, I want to be a Disney animator. I told my story, whatever. And I didn't hear from him. I forgot about it, right? Out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I get in the mail something from the Disney Studios. And it's a handwritten letter by Frank Thomas on his stationery.
Wow.
And it's a long letter. It's a whole page, and it's just, he got my letter. He, told me a little about him and that, and the last part of the letter I remember, he said, next time you're down here, I'd love to have you come by the studio and I'd love to, meet you. And when he said that, I thought, what? Are you kidding me? Frank Thomas wants to meet me? Who am I, And I was down there one day, and my family was at Disneyland Hotel, and we're just hanging around. And my dad and I got in the car and we drove to the Disney Studios.
Oh, wow.
And,
wow.
And we met, and I met it was in the archive building. Mm-hmm. And Frank, I'm sitting there at the table, and all of a sudden, here comes Frank Thomas walking in. He's got his little cardigan sweater on. He looks like your grandpa,
Yeah.
And he sat down with me. I had all my art. I took my art with me, all my drawings, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, this is it. He's going to look at everything I did, and he'd say, "You're hired." Right. We'd love to have you. You're going to take over from me. Yeah. And so, I mean, you're a kid. You think all these things, and he looked through my stuff, and he was really nice. And he pointed a couple things. Oh, this is nice. When it probably was, you look like crud. And but he said a lot of nice little things and stuff. And then he handed me a flyer, and it was for a brochure actually for Cal Arts. This is in 1980, 81, and I looked at it, and my dad was smiling. And as I'm walking out, I thanked him, and he walked away, and he was working on a book, The Illusion of Life, at that time with Ollie Johnson.
Right.
And, he was compiling it, actually. And I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, that's the book he's working on. And so I'm walking out the studio, Brian, and here's what I'm thinking. Now, you got to understand, I'm walking out, and I just went through high school, and I think I'm done with school, and I was just, thinking about going to a local community college.
Right.
And I said, "School again?" I'm not kidding. I looked at my dad and I said, he said, "So what do you think?" And I looked at him and I said, I didn't even look. I was devastated, Brian. I said, he wants me to go to school again? And that's all I could think of. And I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. I went into boxing. I did all this other stuff. I kept drawing. Right. But I just said, no, I'm not going to. I'm just going to keep drawing until I get better, and then I'm going to reapply to Disney, But anyway, so let's go by. Finally, I said, you know what? And I get older, I'm more mature, and I started thinking about it. And I thought, Cal Arts is where I need to be. So I submitted my portfolio, and it was very hard to get into this school, and I got accepted. Had no money, took out a lot of loans and grants.
Wow.
Went there for 2 years and got my first job on Muppet Babies, and that's the beginning.
And you never looked back.
I never looked back.
Wow.
No, I just I burned those bridges, and I just kept going forward. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was the beginning right there, and I was excited just to be actually doing something in ministry, and and then the next year I submitted my portfolio to Disney and got in. Wow. And that was it.
That's magical.
That was years ago.
that whole thing is magical.
Isn't that fun? I look back on it now and I just think how, when you're young, but it was the journey, and whenever you accomplish anything, and this is for a lot of people to hear, and I know a lot of people that have experienced it. I'm sure you have, Brian, but it's not where you've gotten to. If you look back, it's the journey.
That's right.
It's always the journey you think about most. You don't think about where you're at now. Because you're at where you're at, it's, years go by and you're there and you're not thinking about it, but it's the journey where you started and how far you've come and what you did and how you improve yourself. And, so.
I enjoy doing all the interviews on this show. Sometimes they go way, way long, and there's not a whole lot I can do about it because I'm so intrigued and so entertained by what our guests have to say. So I just keep going with it because it's all gold, But we had on a guest from Australia. He's a voice artist. and he does some of his voices here for us, but we're talking about different voices. He has a book out, and it's a wonderful book. I have it, and it's called Cartoon Voices. And so anyway, we talk about Dawes Butler and Don Messick and June Foray and a whole bunch of others. But while we're talking, Keith is going off into doing impressions of all these different characters. And one of the most impressive, and it really impressed me, was his Elmer Fudd imitation. And so I thought you'd like to hear it. If you haven't heard it before, here it is. Here's Keith.
He did in late '86, but he was another one I got to know. And he, in '72, he sent me a tape from his home studio, and this was really kind of interesting to me because he was like a bit of a mystery man. Paul Frees. A lot of people didn't know much about him because he was in everything. Yeah. You heard his voice, Disneyland and movie narrations and commercials. But he was really behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, he's in a lot of things. He was Boris Badenov, right? And,
yes.
Basically doing announcing too from time to time. But I think it was more Conrad, right? Doing
William.
I'm sorry, William Conrad. Thank you.
Yeah. He was the narrator on Rocky and Bullwinkle.
And is that the voice you used for the George of the Jungle? Or you just...
No, for George of the Jungle, I used more of the Freeze type narration voice because he narrated the old George cartoons.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Which was more like, and George of the Jungle in the mighty Bumbershootty village, swinging through the trail. I think the line in the movie was it captured the J. Ward spirit because you saw Brendan Fraser, swinging on the vine and. Right. Suddenly the tree comes up towards him and he's going to slam face first into this huge tree. And the line was, he is swift, he is strong, he is sure. Crash! He is unconscious. As he slid down.
Did the Ward family see that picture? Did they make any comments?
I think they were pretty happy with that picture because it was a success for Disney. Disney was the producer of that one,
right? And
but unfortunately, with the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, even though I loved working on it, it kind of tanked because the family had been tied up in legal battles for about 10 years before the movie,
right?
And one of them was with in trying to revive the character, the original. If you read the book, you'll remember that the contract with General Mills, the original sponsor of Rocky and Bullwinkle, was a bad contract, right. And they had the TV rights forever and ever, and they weren't going to cooperate with this new movie. So my book was put on hold. Everything was on hold for about a few years, and the upshot of it was that about 2 generations of people, when the movie came out of Rocky and Bullwinkle, some kids had not seen the old cartoons for several years. So it was kind of an unknown quantity to them. Whereas at the same time, the first Flintstones or Scooby-Doo movie came out, those cartoons were still on TV, the originals, so everyone knew what the property was.
Right.
So it was just a real pity that happened with Rocky and Bullwinkle that way.
Yeah. Well, they had those characters CGI, right? They were computer animated.
Yes, it was partly traditional animation, and then they morphed into CGI for the once they came to life and interacted with Robert De Niro and these people.
Right.
Because his production company Tribeca was one of the producers of the movie, so he ended up, of course, as fearless leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting how that goes. Have you done Bullwinkle for any of the commercials here in the States?
For several years, I did a lot of Bullwinkle stuff for, everything from promos on Cartoon Network to Minnesota State Lottery to, you name it. We did Taco Bell commercials.
Right.
Where I did Bullwinkle and Boris Badenov in a couple of them.
Can you give us a quick Boris?
This idiot mustn't squirrel again at that shit.
That's wonderful.
Some of these I've got to gear myself up. I haven't done them for a couple of years. So
yeah, you have to warm up, I guess, to get into it.
The one I always enjoyed was Dudley Do-Right. Dudley Do-Right of the Mounties.
That's wonderful. I guess we should get into your book, the Cartoon Voices book, since you've done a few voices for us. And yeah, so let's just get right into that. So this thing, it's 2 volumes. And the first volume is about all the different people.
Yes, it's a done in the style of, I guess, Leonard Maltin's famous book of Mice and Magic. It goes studio by studio. Each chapter is a different studio, and it's the history really of the era when sound cartoons began. And for the first 30 years, the voice people were never given screen credit, except in about mid-40s, Mel Blanc managed to wangle screen credit because he was so essential to Warner Brothers.
Yeah, but he got the exclusive, pretty much the exclusive screen credit for like 10 years, didn't he?
Pretty much. I mean, there's a couple of false rumors going around that was he tried to do that so that nobody else could get credit. Well, that's false, because it was really just because he was the only one of all the voice people in those days who had regular starring characters. You think about all the competing ones at MGM in those days was really Tom and Jerry, who were essentially mute characters. They very, very infrequently spoke.
Except for when Tom screamed, which was Bill Hanna.
Yeah, and that was Bill Hanna. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But you had Droopy, which was
yes,
Mr. Bill Thompson, right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And I think Dawes Butler was in there in the later part of it.
In the 50s, he really got into MGM cartoons, especially for Tex Avery, doing all sorts of. In fact, I guess you know that his, that Huckleberry Hound type voice that really began in MGM as the Wolf.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, the generic wolf and a bunch of
Tex Avery's Wolf. Yeah, that's right.
Bunch of very funny cartoons like oh God. I can't think of the titles. I'm sorry, but they're.
You mean the wolf ones?
Yeah, I mean the wolf is
little Rural Riding Hood.
Well, those are the early. I think those are the early '40s ones. But then he did some. They kind of had a Texan theme to them.
Homesteader Droopy and
yeah, absolutely,
and Deputy Droopy and all of them. Yeah, that's right.
Go. Yeah, those are all Dawes, and I know he was
Dawes
involved.
Butler.
He was involved with the Beanie and Cecil puppet show.
With Bob Clampett. Yeah.
Early on.
Yeah, so this, of course, was around about 49, and he then recommended Stan Freberg because they'd done a series together. If you remember those strange short films called Speaking of Animals, and they were real animals photographed, and then they had the animated mouths superimposed. So it was a very early version of what was like years later on Clutch Cargo, because the mouths. And then they got all the typical Hollywood voice guys in to do the funny one-liners.
Right. And Clutch Cargo was an early TV cartoon, but it was done.
That's right.
It was a video trick. It was actually people's mouths, though. It wasn't animated.
That's right. They were the real actors, and they kind of look grotesque now by today's standards of special effects. But it was this thing that was advertised called Synchro Vox. Vox, I guess, the Latin for voice,
right?
Synchronized voice. But that was this method that they sold Clutch Cargo.
That's fun.
And it was also, I guess, one of the first what they call adventure cartoons rather than funny animals,
Right. I just want to bring up with Warner Brothers cartoons. A lot of people don't, because Mel Blanc always got that voice characterizations credit.
Right.
And it's even more prominent when they did the Bugs Bunny show in the early 60s, because they got the This Is It end title. And they got all the animators, and then it goes, and this is a Bugs Bunny show. And when they go, and this, right, it's the last title card on there is voice characterizations, Mel Blanc, big and prominent on there. And I don't know why they did that. It just seems so odd to me. But there were so many people involved with those cartoons, and you were mentioning some of those people, like Baby Bear of the Three Bears series. There was Stan Freberg, and he did once again the the dumb voice, that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so he did that, and then it had B. Benaderet from
Yes,
the Flintstones that was doing the mama, the timid mother voice. And Henry. Yeah. And then June Foray did Witch Hazel, and I really believe that when I was watching it, I'd see Mel Blanc's name, I'd be like, oh my God, this guy is so versatile.
That's what I thought when I was a kid. It was like, God, he can do women's voices. It was truly when you really thought it was a man of 1,000 voices. And he was contracted to Warner Brothers in 41.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, the first 7 years he did voices for them, he was anonymous as well.
Sure.
It was really in 44 that he started getting this credit that his agent negotiated, because like you sign a contract, and then that meant he was no longer able to do voices for MGM and Columbia and Walter Lantz.
Although
he was the first Woody Woodpecker.
He was the first Woody Woodpecker, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So once he went exclusive with Warner Brothers in early 41, it was another 3 years before he got credit. But that's because his contract was renewed. And in the first time it was renewed, his management managed to say that if any of these cartoons feature either Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, he gets credit. Little by little each year when they renewed it, finally it became he got screen credit for every cartoon.
Sure. Well, he was in almost every cartoon. I think there's a few that do not feature Mel Blanc.
That's right. Yeah, very, very few. Once it really once Bugs Bunny took off in 41, he really they realized they better hang on to this guy and contract him,
Yeah.
Because it was all to do with feedback they got from the exhibitors, how popular these cartoons were doing in theaters. This is, of course, years before television.
Sure.
And of course we grew up watching them played over and over again. Well, audiences back in the day only saw them once, and maybe a really popular title was reissued once a few years later, like Wild Hare, the first Bugs Bunny.
Right. Or
that's why they kept doing little variations on Elmer Fudd's, over the years as a hunter, because that cartoon was so seminal, Wild Hare.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. And I've heard other people do not Mel Blanc's, but Arthur Q. Bryan's.
Brian, yeah.
Elmer Fudd voice. And very few people can do that voice and have it be spot on.
It's a difficult one because it was very close to because Arthur Q. Bryan had that quality in his voice anyway, when he spoke in a straight voice without the speech impediment.
Right.
But
because he is in live action movies, he is in some.
Yes, it's strange to see him do that, especially if he's doing that character with the W's, because a couple of them, he was on a radio show called The Grouch Club at the Warner Brothers radio station, and then they did some shorts called Grouch Club. And you see him on camera. I guess that's the one you probably saw.
Probably.
And it's very strange seeing this little chubby guy couldn't pronounce the word "ah" properly. So I'm going to get that wabbit, that wascoey wabbit.
Well, if you want to check out that podcast with Keith Scott, it's season 1, episode 28. I keep stumbling over this, but I know it's season 1, episode 28. And so please go back and check that out if you haven't heard it. About a year and a half ago on the podcast, we had animator, director, Imagineer, Mr. Jerry Rees. And Jerry came on our show and he talked about his young life getting into animation, and then basically the Disney studio embracing him and bringing him in, mentoring him, and eventually becoming an animator at the studio. He's an amazing talent, and so I figured we should listen to a little bit of Jerry today. So here he is talking about how he went from where he was living to going to the Disney studio, and it's very interesting. and I think you'll enjoy it. So here's Jerry Rees talking about that.
In animation.
Wow.
That was how much I believed it, but I had no clue how to get there. And to me, Burbank was the great big city. I mean, that was, I mean, it's laughable now, but at the time that was like an impossible, far away, big place to go.
Where were you living at the time when that happened?
I was living in Loma Linda, California.
Okay.
Which is not that far away from Burbank, but seemed like the other side of the world to me because I had been just so in that little bubble for so long. But then I stumbled onto it. I was trying to figure out how to do animation. I had gotten from the Cartoon Color Company. There was that wonderful, the Preston Blair book. I think Walter T. Foster had published the Preston Blair animation book. I think so many of us of that generation got that book.
Yes, the animation book, right.
Yes, it was the animation book, Preston Blair, who had done wonderful things in Fantasia, etc. So I had taken a look at that, and I had ordered Acme paper from the Cartoon Color Company and a peg bar, so punched paper and a peg bar, and taped it down to a milk glass thing, was trying to figure out how to do animation. And my dad actually built a multiplane camera rig. It was small, but it had multiple levels that I could use screws to make them go up and down. And it had sort of a dual axis cranks that I could make it move, all directions. And so I would use a tripod and put it over and paint levels and everything. So I was really getting into it. Still had no idea how to knock on Disney's door, but I just ran out of paper and it was getting too expensive and we couldn't keep paying, the family. But I was just, mid-teens and they were helping me pay for things and we couldn't keep buying those punched paper. It was just costing too much. So we found out there was a paper company and we could get non-punched paper. And then I found out there was a place at the Loma Linda University where they had a media department and they had an industrial strength hole punch there. And so I went, aha, I'll ask permission to just punch my unpunched paper there. It'll save us the cost of getting the punched. So I went into the department and asked somebody that was working there and they said, oh yeah, that's our industrial strength hole punch there. You're free to use it if nobody's using it. So I started using it and punching the paper, and then the supervisor of the division comes in and it wonders what I am doing there, this kid in the audiovisual department at the university. And so I told him, well, I'm doing animation and stuff. And he immediately said, you can't do animation. What are you talking about? You need a Oxberry stand and you need listing all these things that I needed that I didn't have.
Right.
And just said, you can't do that. So I slunk out with the paper that I had already punched. And actually, my mom told me later, she was standing at the door at sort of witnessing this guy tell me, you can't do that. And so I didn't have a direct recollection of this, but she told me later that as we got in the car and we're starting to drive home, she kind of went, so how do you feel? This guy kind of read you the riot act. And she said that I turned to her and said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So she was so glad that I had the confidence, right?
Right.
So I actually snuck back in again the second time. And he caught me the second time. And now he was like, okay, if you're going to keep coming in here, you're either not allowed or I have to see what you're up to. So I brought in a little projector, the Super 8 film projector,
right,
and a piece of white paper, and I projected on it the little animation I was doing. And boy, did his tune change.
Wow.
He was like, you did that? That's yours? You didn't tracing and stuff? And I said, yeah, I that's mine. So he said, I went to a conference and somebody from Disney was there, and they were talking about how their veterans in the animation department are getting close to retirement age. So they were thinking of starting to recruit new talent. And so if you're interested, and he rips off the piece of paper and writes a phone number there, and he says, this is for Ed Hansen, who's the production manager at Disney Feature Animation, and if you're interested.
Wow.
So the guy who said, you can't do it, gave me the most important phone number of my life. And so I did call, right. I was 16 and I called Ed Hansen, and he was interested and said, "Oh, well, have your dad drive you down and we'll take a look at what you got." So I put a portfolio together, and some of it was portraits because I'd been obsessed with Rockwell and John Singer Sargent and Linedecker and stuff, in addition to animation and all of that. So I took my little reels down. So they, my dad waited in the lobby, and I went to see Ed, and he took me up to meet Eric. And so they just kind of said, "Well, why don't you start mentoring with Eric?" And of course, it was astounding because Eric Larson was Walt's famous 9 old men, named after the Supreme Court judges.
Sure.
The joke on that, but there were 5 of the 9 old men working at the studio at the time. So and Eric was going to start taking people under his wing, and so Eric just said, "Well, here's a desk. So anytime you have a break from high school, this will be your desk, and you can try things, and I'll teach you." That's
pretty neat. Was John Lounsbury there at the time, or had he passed away by then?
Didn't meet Lounsbury. Frank and Ollie and Milt and Eric and Mark Davis were all still hanging around.
Wow.
At their desk animating. So, that was a startling change of events where I had breathed it and slept it and believed in it and imagined it and never had an idea how it could possibly happen. And then suddenly just boom, it was happening. And thanks to the guy giving me the phone number. And
right. Wow. It's pretty amazing. It's a great story.
And then my parents told me years later, that Disney would call them occasionally to coax them and say, "Does Jerry have a break from high school yet? Can he come in and do some more mentoring with Eric?" And so they were not just waiting for me to call, which I didn't realize at the time. They were calling my parents to provoke the situation along.
That's pretty neat.
So, Eric, oh my gosh, he helped me so much. I was under the completely false impression that cleanup animation is how you approached the scene from the start. Right. I had no idea about roughs and doing different drafts and everything. Mm-hmm. And I would always draw very carefully to look like it was on model, and sure. he would ask me like, where are your roughs? And was like, what is a rough? So man, he took out the blunt 6B pencil and would just draw these beautiful action lines and things for characters. And he said, don't fall in love with the drawing. This is about the performance and about the movement that conveys the emotional performance. And you got to work on that. And when that comes alive, then you can bother to make pretty drawings over it. So he really helped out.
Well, if you want to hear more of Jerry Rees, we have a couple of episodes with him, part 1 and part 2. And it's from season 1, episode 26 and 27. So please check that out if you want to hear more from Jerry. Very talented gentleman. Anyway, last but not least, here we have a clip of Mr. Willie Ito. Now, if you don't know who Willie Ito is, he was a key layout man for Hanna-Barbera, but he got his start at Disney, went to Warner Brothers Cartoons, and then went to work for Bob Clampett on the Beanie and Cecil show, and then landed at Hanna-Barbera as one of the top layout artists. And a layout artist basically draws characters in different poses so that the animators can follow that. And you have to be really good to have that job and have it for as long as Willie did. He eventually got into Disney as a basically drawing for character merchandise, and eventually he kind of got into their art program and doing comics and stuff like that. So anyway, he is a wonderful guy, and here he talks about going into the Disney studio for the first time and meeting a certain fellow that happened to work there. So please sit back and enjoy this.
My friends, because we were all post-war kids going to college, they were all going on to like Stanford and Berkeley and San Francisco State and universities, going into things like pre-med, dentistry, pharmacy, and the girls in our group were all going into teaching, and I kind of felt that, gee, I'm gonna go in to make animated cartoons, and that kind of seemed a little frivolous and kind of inhumanitarian, so to speak.
Right.
And so I went to my instructor and I said, you know, Mr. Beats, I think I'm going to change, and I'm going to focus on becoming a medical illustrator. He looked me straight in the eye and shook his head and said, no, you're not. And he says, I'm going to write you a letter of introduction to Don Graham, who is a dean of Chouinard's Art Institute in Los Angeles. And of course, as you know, Chouinard's is now today California Institute of the Arts, CalArts.
Yes.
One of the prominent animation schools. So I took the summer, made my way down to Los Angeles. I met with Mr. Graham. He looked at my portfolio and offered me a working scholarship for the summer. And I thought, wow, wonderful, you know. So I was very excited, and of course, I'm in one of my instructor happens to be Mark Davis, who is one of the 9 old men, and then my cartooning teacher was Teehee, who was a writer director at UPA, which at that time was the hottest studio in town,
right.
With their Magoo and Gerald McBoing series. So I was now taking classes, night classes and all. But I thought, you know, as long as I'm down here in Los Angeles and I have my students' portfolio with me, I'm going to use it as a ticket to visit the Disney studios. So I called up personnel, and they said, yeah, come on in, made an appointment for me. And so I figured, well, yeah, you know, this way I'll be able to see the studio, see the landmark street sign, Mickey Avenue, Dopey Drive, see the animation building, you know, all the pictures that I've seen in books about Walt Disney and that movie, Reluctant Dragon. And I thought, wow, you know, that's really that will be my highlight for the summer. So,
right.
So I made my trek to the Disney studio, and it was a very hot June summer. It must have been about 96, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Burbank. And I was dressed in my San Francisco best, you know, my tweed jacket and my heavy woven slacks and the whole bit, sweating like a dog. And I walk into the animation building, and I go to the elevator and press the button, and elevator door swings open, and then standing before me is Walt Disney.
Oh, there you go.
Now he's with an associate. They're deeply in conversation, but as Walt steps into the elevator, he sees me cowering in the corner in the back of the elevator and gives me a polite nod of acknowledgement. Then they both turn around and they continue their conversation. And let me tell you, that was the world's longest 4 flights trip on the elevator I have experienced.
Yes, I can imagine. Jeez.
So anyhow, I go in to have my interview. Now, I certainly not expecting to get hired, because I figured I got 4 years of Chouinard's to prepare a real professional portfolio, at which time I would come back and seriously look for work. So Ken Sealing, who is the personnel director. He gets on the intercom and says, Mr. Ito's here for his appointment. And so, a couple of minutes later, in comes two guys into the office. And one is a fellow named Andy Ingman, who is the production supervisor. And following behind him is this little Asian guy. And he's kind of walking behind big Andy Ingman, like Droopy Dog would in a Tex Avery cartoon. And then I noticed, oh my, he's Asian fella. And so when we were introduced, they said, well, I'd like you to meet Iwo Takamoto. And I thought to myself, oh, Takamoto, well, that's Japanese, So we met, and then they took my portfolio into the conference room. They asked me to wait out in reception. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, Mrs. Sealing came out and said, well, thank you. Thank you for coming in. We enjoyed looking at your portfolio, but don't call us, we'll call you. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I'm thinking of myself. Okay, I'll see you in 4 years. And so I took my sweet time leaving the Disney studio, because at that time they had these beautiful originals from Snow White and Pinocchio and Fantasia all displayed on the walls,
Oh,
of
yeah.
course, now, with an X-Acto knife, these things found a way to disappear. So now they have prints up there, But anyhow,
Right.
About 2 weeks later, I come home late from my night class, and there's a Western Union telegram stuck on my door. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, back in the 50s, a Western Union telegram could only mean real good news or real bad news.
Right.
And having my parents back in San Francisco, I thought, oh, my goodness. So I gingerly opened up the telegram, and on the top, a headline, this is from Walt Disney Production. And then as I read on, it invited me to come in the following Monday to take a test.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, oh, my goodness. So that Monday, I found my way to Disney Studio and walked onto the, ever famous hallowed halls of Disney, and went up, and they gave me my test. And after, then I turned it in at noon and took a lunch break. And when I came back at 1 o'clock, I was told that I was hired.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at Cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Well, please check out some of these episodes if you haven't checked them out before. And hopefully this will inspire you to check out some other episodes that you may not have listened to. So there you go. By the way, that episode with Willie Ito, that was also from a couple of years ago. And it was actually from June of 2022. So it's season 1, episode 14. I keep screwing that up, but there you go. And so it's a couple of episodes there. It's episode 14 and 15 with Willie Ito. So please check that out. If you really like what you're listening to, please subscribe. Go to your favorite service. Like we said before, we are now on YouTube Music, so you can check us out there if it's easier. Or we're on a bunch of other services too. So go wherever you go to your favorite podcasts and subscribe there. If you really like what you're listening to, please tell a friend. I'm begging you, please tell somebody about us, and I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, we have more fun coming. Next week, we're lining up a whole bunch of dandy interviews, and we'll let you know on the Cartoonerific News next Tuesday about our next guest. So, anyway, I want you all to have a great day. I want you to have a great week, and we'll see you all again next time. Thank you for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.